Hi guys, it's Kelly here, and I am back with another video featuring my next stamp set. It just happened to work out that way. So this is poinsettia and pine cones. This is from the Rabbit Hole design. And this I'm showing you on the lilies, which was actually my first stamp set that I ever did, and my first one with the Rabbit Hole. I do have a game plan for later on to use these, and originally that's how I thought I was going to do it, is using them together, but that's not how it worked out. So yeah. Please, I understand they're coming out back to back, but please know I drew these in March. So they come out when the companies want to release them. And obviously we're coming up on, the holiday season. And so these make sense. So let's talk about what we've got in the set. Okay. We have a large swag that has poinsettia in the center, and then some pine cones, some pine, some berries. And this is a generously sized, you can see I'm stamping it here on a 5.5 by 8.5 inch sheet. And then it has a additional poinsettia with an additional leaf, and then just a pine branch with pine cones that you can use in and of itself, which is what I'm going to do here. I'm going to create a background for one of my cards with just the pine branch, and using some gold pigment ink, I'm just going to stamp it all over the background. It's going to give me a really nice, detailed, but subtle background, because today we're talking about how to kind of level up the dimension that is in your card design. Here, because this is the first time that I stamped it, I had to stamp it twice. I'm going to go in, and my goal is to fill in the center first. Anytime you're stamping something that you want to look like pattern paper, you want to fill in that middle, and then you can go in with the edges and kind of stamp just the parts that you need. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I'm going to show you just a little bit of the stamping because you're going to get the idea. This is a long one, y'all. We're in it. We're in it for the long haul. Get a drink, get a snack, hang out, get your, I know a lot of people like to watch them with their morning coffee. Get your coffees. I have mine, Lord knows. And we're just going to we're going to do 3 cards and talk about the multiple ways that you can add dimension, and just kind of level up your card making. So whether you are beginner, intermediate, expert, there should be something for everybody in this video, which I really genuinely try to do, because I have been those. I have been all those levels, and no matter what level you're at, I want you to have something that you're happy with. So here, this is the full background stamped out. I'm going to set that aside to dry because I did stamp it in pigment ink, and then we're going to move on to the coloring. Because I draw images, I like to put them all together, okay? That's why a lot of my images are much more detailed, but sometimes when you aren't the person who drew it, it can be a little bit challenging to see where all the parts go. And so what I'm doing here is what I call mapping. I'm going in with a very light color, and then I'm just going to map out what they're going to be. For example, here I'm going in, I'm mapping in the actual flower, because there's also 2 poinsettia leaves drawn in here. And in reality, poinsettias, they grow their own, like the leaves are part of the flower. They just happen to turn green. You know what I'm saying? Like as they get larger, they change color. And so poinsettia is really a plant. It's not even really a flower. But anywho, so they're drawn in the same style, so it can be a little bit confusing to see where they are. So here, if you have purchased the stamp set and you're wondering how to color it, just pause it here so you can see how everything is mapped out, where the berries are, where the pine is, where the pine cones start and end, all of that. I wanted to give you something so that way if there was any confusion looking at it, you would know where it went. It's just one of those things that's kind of like a side effect of a more detailed image, and I know that from coloring other people's illustrations. So I wanted to give you something that would be a little bit helpful. So this is my darkest color. Going in and coloring in the centers, you can see that the poinsettias, like each individual petals, do have a connecting point in the center. So I'm leaving those light, but the underneath of it would be very dark. If you are uncomfortable with alcohol markers or whatever color medium you're using, I would recommend going in and mapping out your shadows with your lightest color. I colored like that for years until I got more comfortable and more confident with my darks. And now I am comfortable with my ability to go in and map in my shadows, and that's what I'm doing here. So remember, when we're doing shadows, it is any point the two places meet or where one object lays on top of the other. You'll also notice at the bottom, I'm adding a little bit of roundness kind of up the sides of the petals. And this is just going to help give it more dimension. I am leaving a little bit of a gap, like a little edge, if you will, because I don't want it to be dark on dark on dark, or I'm going to lose my dimension. It's not going to look realistic. So I got to leave myself a little bit of an edge on especially the top petals, for there to be some lightness and break that up. But we're just going to go through, we're going to do all of the coloring, and then we're going to get to the card making. But first of all, I know that a lot of you guys come here, obviously, for story time, but not only for story time, because I am a colorist. And so I wanted to show, especially because it is my illustration, I wanted to show how I approached coloring it. So that way, if you choose to purchase it, like you're like, I love the images, I know I'll use them, then you'll have some sort of guideline for how to go about coloring them. Now, obviously, you don't have to do anything as involved as what I'm doing. I like a 4-color blend, but you could certainly get away with 3. And you don't have to add in necessarily all the round shadings, but maybe let's say you're in an intermediate level and you're like, I'm pretty comfortable with my markers, but I, just want to kind of bump it up a notch. Maybe give that a try, but start with your lightest color. There's a lot of ways to get where you want to be, and don't discount where you're at now. It is really all about the journey and the practicing and the learning. It's not so much necessarily about the end result, because I have been doing this. When did I start? I've been card making 13 years total. And, when I first started card making, I wouldn't even stick to my Copics, because I got in my own head and I discouraged myself that mine weren't coming out the way everybody else's were. And so I just stopped doing it until I found a teacher who showed me, and she sat down with me and showed me. And I know that that's a little bit different than watching YouTube videos, because I can't sit down with you and show you, though I totally would. If we ran into each other at a Dunkin' Donuts or something, I'd be happy to. But she sat down with me and kind of showed me where I could, what I could do with the level I was at. And then that just, gave me the confidence to just keep going. And so I hope that I am doing that for some of you, to give you the confidence to just keep going, because you can do it, but we all have to start somewhere. It's a learned skill. So now we're on to our second midtone. We're going to fill in the large majority of these petals, but we're only going to leave little peaking parts of that lightest pink that we will fill in with our lightest color. The other thing you have to remember when you're adding shading with anything, not just alcohol markers, is it looks wild until it doesn't. So even though it might look crazy, like look at the right-hand side of this flower. It looks so bizarre. But as we're adding that color and getting closer and closer to our end result, it really does start to come together. And with this kind of dimensional shading, it really does not come together until you put the last color on there and everything just kind of blends together and make friends. Speaking of our last color, I'm using an R32, and I know that this will bleach out my other reds quite a bit, so I am not just coloring it all over everything. I'm being very purposeful in sticking to the center of my petals and the edges, so that those are the lightest areas to catch the highlight. Also, any of the places where the poinsettia is kind of curled over will also have a highlight on it. So I super love the way that they came out. I colored all 3 of them the same way. But that is why I chose to show you the swag, because it has everything in it. So when I colored the the pine and the pine cone branches, I colored it the same way. When I colored the extra poinsettia, I colored it the same way. When I colored those leaves, I colored them the same way. So that way, this one, you can really just see it all in one. This particular stamp is, like I said, very generously sized. The way that I chose to use it was kind of like at a diagonal, so I could keep as much of it in there as possible. This is a great size for a slimline card if you want to include all of the pieces. I did end up having to trim just a couple of my branches off, but for my particular design, that didn't bother me at all. For the berries, I did the same thing, like the same red combination. For the center of the poinsettia, I'm going to go in with kind of a yellowish gold. If you watch my channel, this combination should be pretty familiar by now. It's pretty much my go-to. And so I just went in and added little bits of darks kind of to one side of each of the like stamen area, and then went in for the lightest color and blended them all out. For the pine cones, I chose to do, this is like my go-to, like all of these are my go-to color combinations, to be quite honest, except for the pine, and we'll talk about that when we get there. The pine cones, I have seen, the Rabbit Hole Designs did such a great, like their team did such a knockout job with the coloring of this image. And here's what I've learned and this is not like tapping myself on the back, like tooting my own horn, none of that. This is like speaking to their talent. The pine cone coloring that they did was so excellent. Like it was so beautiful, whether they've used pencils or watercolors. It came out really beautiful. So here what I'm doing is I'm going in, I put in my darkest shadows, which are going to be kind of underneath the pine cone portions that are sticking out, and then blending that out. The only portion I am leaving for my highlight are the edges, and you can see, I know it's hard to see on camera because we're not super zoomed in, but when you stamp it, you can see where the edges are, and that's the part that I left for the lightest color. Everything else went all the way out to the E55. And we're going to come back later, because you guys know I love my detail work. We're going to come back later and show how you can even further kind of bolster up those highlights and give them a lot of dimension. The pine itself, are we going to move on to the leaves or the pine? Do you know? I don't know. Let's watch it together. We are going to move on to the leaves. So for the leaves, I chose some brighter greens to have them stand out, because I knew the pine was going to be more blue greens, but I didn't want them to be so yellow green that they were like garish in comparison to the rest of the coloring, since that was maybe a bit more muted. So I chose these greens, but I did choose a yellow green for my highlight to bring in that brightness. The other thing that I'm going to do to set these apart from the actual petals is I'm going to go in with one of my midtones, and I'm just going to do some little like stripes of color along, like coming out from the center of the leaf. And that's going to add a little bit of texture and dimension to the leaves. You just want to make sure you follow the shape of the leaf when you're doing that. But otherwise, the coloring is pretty much the same. Little bit of shading, at the base and at the tip, and then a little bit of shading down the center, blending that out to my lightest color, and then adding those just really soft lines. When you're doing it, you just want to pick one of your colors that isn't going to be so light it's invisible, but isn't going to be so dark that it's like super in your face. Unless that's the bold look you're going for, which is totally fine. I wasn't. I was going for a little bit of a softer look. So I liked the way that these came out. I liked the way that the little stripies added some dimension and some difference from the actual poinsettia flower. And now we are going to move on to the pine. For this, you'll notice my darkest color is a B99. That might seem a little strange, but because we're going to be putting so many blue greens over top of it, you're not even going to see the navy at the end of the day. It's just going to make my darkest teal a little bit darker. And this is a great way to practice your flicking technique because that's all that I'm doing. I'm not even necessarily making sure that I'm staying on top of every single line. I am just flicking from the center stem out, and try, like, obviously you're going to have shorter strokes as the pine ends, and larger strokes the closer it is to the base. But this is a really, really great way to practice your flicking. And because Copics are transparent, or alcohol markers in general are transparent, as we're layering the colors, there's going to be some where it deposits more color, some where it, the lighter colors remove a little bit of the darkness. So it's going to give us a lot of depth and dimension in those pine needles. They're pine needles. So the only thing that I noticed with this is, because this does have a die, you obviously don't have to purchase the dies, but if you are going to be using the die, I did notice when I was die cutting out, some of them were a little fuller than others. So I don't know if, in order to maintain the white outline evenly, it would behoove you to die cut it out before you cut the pine. But I was okay with the way that it ended up being. Also, I originally showed you 4 colors. I did not end up going all the way out to the BG72. I just didn't feel like they needed it. I felt like the 75 was light enough. And also, you don't even have to use all these colors. You could just pick a darker green or a darker blue-green and just go over the pine themselves without adding all of this extra fullness, and that would be pretty as well. So yeah, and then once all of the coloring is done, we're going to move on to the die cutting. This is obviously a Christmas-ish set, but one of the things that I really love about like the pine branch and the extra poinsettia and leaf is you can use those for just winter cards. Now, the sentiments in the set are all Christmas, but nobody said you had to be married to the sentiments in a set. You certainly can mix and match. The rabbit hole has some really great general, friend, hello, thank you, kind of stuff. Here, I'm doing my die cutting. These die cut wonderfully, like, relatively close to the image, which I love. You can see over here on the right hand side, these are some other ones that I colored up. I ended up not using that red and white one. I didn't really love it, and I'm still kind of playing around with how I can do it to make myself love it. But this goes back to what I was talking about in the beginning of the video with practice. I'm still practicing, guys. I still am. So let's talk about how you can use the set. First of all, your extra poinsettia is a little bit smaller, so you certainly could layer it on top of the swag and get a different look. You can use the poinsettia and the leaves by themselves. You can do another poinsettia and make yourself a little cluster because, you can, I guess, arrange them any way that you like. You can use the poinsettia with the branch. I like being able to use them different ways. You can also use them to kind of make yourself a border where you're, like layering these things up, sneaking the leaves in. You'll see later on in one of the cards that I trimmed off a part of the swag and used it in a different card. So there's a lot of options. Now, let's talk about this dimension, which is probably why you clicked on the video, right? So I wanted a teal in the background that was going to match my pine. I didn't have one that was muted. Nobody is surprised by this because I like bright colors. So I picked a darker teal. This is Adirondack by Hero Arts. And then I'm going to make it just a bit more muted by going in and adding some gray. This is Hickory Smoke, and some black over top of it. It's giving it a lot more texture, which I love. I always think that makes your cards more interesting. So it's going to give it some more texture, but then also it's going to mute down the brightness of that teal. And then I did this to all of the teal panels that I used. 2 of them you'll be able to see in the background of the card design. One of them is just a matte. And for the one that was just a matte, I didn't do the whole piece. I just went around the edges because ain't nobody got time for that, yo. So that is that finished. You can see the difference between the two. And now with the dimension, we're going to do one that's popped up. We're going to do one that talks about layering dimension. in different ways. And then we're going to do a shadow box. So this is the piece that is the shadow box. This piece is 6¼ by 5½. And then you want to score, you'll notice I'm scoring twice. It's because I made an error. What you actually want to do is score at 1/2 inch and at 1 inch. That's where you want to score at. And then this is going to create these little springs that will help your shadow box kind of pop up. This is 110% a Jennifer McGuire learned trait, and I think it's super cool. I love that you have the option. So on your 1 inch mark, you're going to fold it in towards your card on both sides. And then on your 1/2 inch mark, you're going to fold it out to your edges. And both times I'm just reinforcing those folds with my bone folder. And like I said, this is going to create the springs that will help it bounce up. And the section in the middle is 4¼ by 5½ for an A2 size card. I wanted to cut this out and make a window. So here is that background that we created using the gold pigment ink. I am just going to glue this down so that I can cut them at the same time. It's just going to save me having to cut it and hope, line it up and everything else. I'm just going to glue it and cut it. For my different windows and frames, these are all the infinity dies from Hero Arts. I'm using the hexagons, the diamonds, and the arches. And I am going to cut this one right out of the center. And then you'll see, I'm going to show you all the different ways that I did it. For the gold piece that's going to go behind it, I cut it with the next smaller hexagon. For the arch, again, out of the white piece, I cut it larger. The next size down, I cut my gold piece out of. And this is what's going to help me create my frames. For the last one, I knew I was only using the frame. I wasn't cutting anything out of my card front. And so I cut the diamond out of the bigger size and then went back in once that was die cut and die cut the slightly smaller one to create my frame. This gold cardstock is the, what is it? The matte gold from Concord and Ninth. Love them. Love Greg. They're an amazing company as well. So now that we have all of our pieces parts, I'm making 3 cards. So I'm kind of setting everything aside for all of their parts before we start putting everything together, just so I have everything that I need. When you're trying to make 3 at once, it's real easy to lose them. Speaking of pieces parts, I needed to do my sentiments, so I chose to treat them. This is the Cottontail anti-static embossing tool from the Rabbit Hole. Hands down the best anti-static tool I've ever used. And now I'm going to stamp these in that same gold pigment ink, but I am going to heat emboss them this time. You could definitely heat emboss the background as well. I just wanted it to be a bit softer. I didn't think it needed to be heat embossed. So I'm going to stamp these down. I'm going to heat emboss them with some Hero Arts gold embossing powder. And I am going to stamp quite a few more since I need multiple sentiments. I'm just going to show you these ones. I have a hard time stamping them all and then embossing all of them. I don't know, for some reason I just feel like I get a better result if I stamp it, emboss it, stamp it, emboss it. You know what I'm saying. Yeah, so I hope today, this is just a side note, I hope the voiceover today sounds better. Recently, I told you guys I had some issues a while ago where I was having a hard time with my microphone cord, so I bought a replacement. But then on my new computer, I was getting some feedback, both in the ways of you guys telling me you heard the feedback, but then also actual feedback, including my husband. So I have a new cord today, and I'm hoping it sounds better. Please let me know. Let's build this first one. This is very easy, way to add dimension. Almost all of us do this at this point. So I've matted a piece of white cardstock onto that teal. I'm going to glue my gold frame down flat in the center. Because I have such a large focal point, I wanted to be able to see part of the frame in the background. Because I don't know, when it comes to holiday cards, is it even a holiday card if it has no glitter or metallic on it? Is it? To me, no. To me, the answer is no. So I glued that down flat. Here, I'm going to use this as just a placeholder for now because I felt like it needed a little something. So I'm going to go in with some Gold Perfect Pearls and just spatter some ink kind of up to the right and down to the left. That way there's a little bit of more added interest in the background and not just this one image. I feel like it connects the gold frame to the rest of the card. I am getting some spatters on my coloring. I'm totally fine with that. But you put my hand up there to do the majority of it blocked. Now, this is how we're going to do the first dimension. Super common. A lot of us do this. I'm going to use some pop dots to just pop up the image. So my one focal point is popped up over this frame. And this is the easiest way to do layering and get good dimension without really having to fuss with anything, is just using a simple foam tape of whatever. They have various levels. This one is a little bit higher, but you use whatever you'd like to use. Then I'm just going to put the sentiment right over the center there. And I chose to use a larger sentiment because I have a larger focal point. And so this says Merry Christmas. I don't think I mentioned I cut them out with their coordinating dies. And they cut super close as well. Love it. And then we're going to move on to the next one. The next one is mixing various heights and how that in and of itself can get you substantially more interest in your card design. So first things first, I have these strips of foam tape. These are lower profile. I did stack them up 2 and 2 just to get a little bit more height. And I'm going to I'm going to adhere this to my background. Then I'm going to fill in my gold frame flat. So we have a little bit of height, and then we have some of this gold frame that's kind of just going to sink in there. Then we're going to do 2 different things here with our focal point. So one of them is going to be to pop it up so it's nice and high. And one of them is going to be to tuck it inside. So we've got a lot of different levels here, which is going to create a ton of interest. I like to, I guess I kind of call it like pinning. I just pin them there. I put a little bit of glue on the back to just kind of hold it in place while I get everything else, like the little leaves, adhered. So then that way when I am adhering it with the foam tape, it is all just one piece and I'm not having to do individual pieces parts because I find that to be the easiest. And that's just me. You do whatever you like to do. Some people like to hold it with press and seal. I do that with dies more often than not. But here, I'm going to glue this. This little piece right here is actually a part of the swag that I stamped and die cut and then just trimmed down. So now you have a piece that is flat and kind of blocking a little bit of that gold frame so you can tell that it's in front. We have the height from the arch around us, and then we have even more height from what ends up being the focal point, which is this pine branch with the poinsettia. I think another way you could do this, and I went back and forth on how to do it, would be to put the poinsettia in the center and let either one of the branches kind of hang down. I think that would be beautiful as well. But I really just kind of wanted to show the different ways that you could do layering to get a different look and get more mileage. Because you could do this same setup that we just did the same way we did the first one. You know, you could do the gold arch and you could stick the poinsettia and the pine branch on top with some foam tape. This is just another way to kind of step it up. Speaking of, we're going to add in another level, and how we're going to do that is we're going to stack our sentiments. So I cut the embossed piece out of black, obviously, but then I cut 2 more of each out of white. And I stacked them together, and then this is going to give me more height and more weight to my sentiment without it competing. So we have about 5 different heights and layering of things in this card, and it makes it really very interesting to look at. The last one is going to be our shadow box. And for that, we're going to have a floating element. So here I have, this is just a scrap piece of acetate. The acetate that I buy is from Hero Arts and it's 5x7. So I almost always have a leftover piece. So I just save them for things like this. Here I'm going to trim it down to size and I'm going to adhere that acetate right across the center. So here's the funny thing. And I was laughing to myself when I was editing the footage because I was like, I'm figuring this out as I go, guys. That's how all my cards are. And I'm like, this looks like I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing because I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. But then in my head, I was like, if you want professional, go watch Jennifer's video. And I mean that, like, and not in like a snarky way. Like if you want somebody who absolutely is on point and knows exactly what they're doing, Jennifer has an amazing video on shadow box cards. Me, I'm just your regular everyday person muddling my way through. So here I glued down my acetate. I glued down the gold frame, but then it didn't fit perfectly. I had to trim it down a little bit, both on the outside edge and on the inside because my piece was exactly 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and it cannot be exactly, otherwise your card won't pop up. Here I'm going in with some tear tape. This is a super strong adhesive, but I'm only putting adhesive on the spring portion. The inside of it is not going to have any sort of adhesive because that's the part that we want to pop up. So now once I have that, I'm going to remove the tapes and then I'm going to adhere one side and then the other, and you can watch me you can watch me struggle with how to make that happen. Because I get one side down and lined up, but then I can't figure out how to get the other side down and lined up. And ultimately what I ended up doing was just folding the piece in. And like you can see, it's like scooting further and further down the screen because I'm scooting it further and further towards me because I have no idea how to get it lined up. So I just smushed it in together and then I was finally able to line up the edge. And then it wasn't popping as well as I thought it should. I did have to go in and kind of push out the edges. It was like I scored it too well, and so it wasn't popping as much as I would like. But I did, like, once I went in and scooted them open, it was great. Now I'm going to adhere my flower and the leaves right across that acetate. It's going to hide that little strip that we had and create this floating flower element with our sentiment right in the center of our shadow box, which obviously adds a ton of interest and dimension because the whole card pops up. You know what I'm saying? The whole thing kind of pops up. And so this is really cool. Originally, I thought, well, I'm going to do them all as shadow box cards. But ultimately, I didn't think that that was something that would be useful for everyone. And that was much more important to me. So, yeah, I'm super excited. I know I felt a little bit like, oh no, like I just had a stamp release and now I have another stamp release. But ultimately, I think that they're so different because, first of all, they're for different seasons, they're different styles, that I think that, you know, maybe you might love one and want to skip the other, or maybe you love both, which I think would be fantastic. But either way, I think they're both beautiful illustrations, and then I hope you enjoy using them and making beautiful things for the people that you love, because ultimately, that's really my goal, is I want to be able to introduce you guys to companies that I really love and enjoy working with, as well as giving you something that will be super versatile. So you'll notice, you know, in this set, the poinsettia, you don't even have to color it as a poinsettia. You could use the flower and the leaves separately and color them any way that you wanted. And you could turn it into whatever you wanted. Same thing with the pine cones and the branch. They'd make great sympathy cards or masculine cards. I just want them to be versatile so you get as much mileage out of them as possible. So to finish off the cards, I added some shimmer to each one of the flowers. Here's where we're going to really bolster up that highlight on the pine cones, and that's just using a little bit of white gel pen. I did that on all of the highlight areas as well as the centers of each of the flowers. I added little highlights on the berries on the swag, and then of course the little gemstones rounded everything out. This is all 3 of the cards. I hope that you guys are inspired to make something. Please check out the rest of the Rabbit Hole Designs release. There were so many great illustrations in there. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.